With that, here's Steve Baker. Steve Baker, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Now we have some distance between right now and January 6th. I think you know as much or more about it than anybody. Can you just describe it in general? What was January 6th in retrospect?
I like to couch it in this preface. Is I saw a lot of people doing bad things that day.
Yes.
I saw a lot of people doing good things.
You were there.
I was there.
Yeah.
I've been prosecuted for being there.
Yep.
I saw a lot of otherwise good people doing some stupid things that day. But that's true on both sides of the police line.
Yep.
Now, you were one of the first people to have access to the treasure trove of that alleged 41,000 hours worth of video. I think that was back in February of 23.
Something like that.
Something like that. And in fact, you had a couple of your producers called me to ask me what they needed to be looking at. And you took the Lieutenant Tarek Johnson story that you did on your second week or second day of that. That was my suggestion. And the truth of the matter is that it was a setup, what happened at the Capitol. It was manipulated. It was engineered. And there is incredible amount of disinformation on both sides of the line. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left. It doesn't matter if you're on the right, whether you're MAGA, whether you're on the sedition hunters side of the ledger. It doesn't matter. Tremendous amount of wrong information on both sides. And one of the things that I've endeavored to do, because I've had more access to the video than any other journalist in the world. I've spent more time in there, not only myself, but teams of other journalists working with me that we've gone in there with focused intentions and knowing what we were looking for. And then obviously surprised by many things. Like, for instance, one of the biggest pieces of misinformation on the right is that the doors were thrown open by the Capitol Police and people were waved into the Capitol. That's not true. All 7 of the doors that were breached at the Capitol were breached from the inside by the protesters who first went through the broken windows on that Northwest Senate wing door that we've famously seen. Now, after that, in an effort to de-escalate, once the building was overrun, Capitol Police did hold doors open for people. And that was one of your first videos, was showing the shaman being led to the Senate chamber, and a cop opened the door for him. And that was a brilliant reveal. They did do those kinds of things, but not until later, not until after the Capitol was breached. And that's one of the mistakes that, again, the right makes. The biggest mistake that the left makes is they are convinced by the narrow presentation of video that they saw. Because they'll tell you. I mean, my critics will tell it from the left, will say, you can't gaslight me. I saw it with my own eyes. I was watching it live. I know what happened. No, you don't. You saw a very narrowly focused battle scene. There were only like between 80 and 100 people who did any violence that day at all. Out of the hundreds of thousands of people that went to the Capitol that day, only 80, Tucker. But if you show the same battle scene from this angle, this camera, that camera, and you show it over and over and over and over again relentlessly for 5 years, then they believe that they know what they've seen. But they don't. Not until you've seen all of the other footage, which we have endeavored to do. I don't think anybody can see 40,000 hours worth of video, but we've seen the most important parts of it. And that's why I can honestly sit before anybody, again, on the right or the left, and go, no, that's not correct. And the right has a lot wrong as well. What they do have right is that it was a Fedsurrection, but I don't think it was set up by the FBI. I believe, and I've talked about this before, so this isn't a big revelation. I'll give you a couple of those later. But this is and was a setup that was designed and manipulated by elements of the Department of Defense, Capitol Police, and the CIA. To take down, it was a furtherance of the CIA and the intelligence community operation to take Trump out from ever being in politics ever again.
And so the idea was to provoke something so awful that he would be maybe legally prohibited by conviction and an impeachment trial, but otherwise so stained that he could never run again.
That's exactly what the intent and the purpose was. And it was manipulated from the very beginning. I mean, look, you've done stories, and all of us want to avoid defamation lawsuits, but I'm kind of past that point now. But if we started from the very beginning and revisited every aspect of January 6th, this would have to be a 20-part series today, and we're not going to do that. But
well, give us some indication of why you've concluded it was a setup.
The first thing that happened, and I was there that day, I captured my own video, and as I was driving home on the 7th from D.C. to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I live, we started hearing about the arrests that were already being made, and the dragnet was already thrown the next day. We're hearing about it on the radio, television, on the drive home. So I didn't go home. I actually called a friend of mine, special operator, United States Army, and said, hey, I need a place to crash for a few days, because before I get arrested, thinking that for sure, because I went inside the Capitol building, that would happen, even though I went in with a camera and in the intent of following the story where the story went as a journalist, not as a rioter, and I never did any rioting, or any violence or anything of that type. But because of the types of people that were being arrested, I thought, okay, well, I need to go hide out somewhere. I need to write my story. I need to publish my videos, go through them all. And then when I get my story out, they can come get me. So the first thing I did is I started going through frame by frame, analyzing my own video. And so I'm staying with a tier 1 special operator, and he's, standing over my shoulder, looking at the videos that I have, and he's pointing to the screen and going, okay, now watch him. This is his job. Watch what he does here. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's got a sandwich in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other hand. And he goes, yeah, watch what happens right here. Watch, he does that. Now he disappears into the crowd. Now watch her. This is what she does. Now this is her job. And I'm seeing this through another set of eyes. And what are you talking about? He goes, well, this is what we do overseas. This is how we incite color revolution overseas. We're trained to do that. And so while I'm in my 5-day process of going through all of my stuff and writing my first story about January 6th, which was 9,500 words, what I saw that day, what I experienced that day. One of these times he's leaning over my shoulder. He says, oh, we were there that day. And again, I'm like, what? He said, yeah, we had boots on the ground that day.
Meaning the National Guard waiting down the street?
No, meaning special operators from the U.S. Army.
In plain clothes?
In plain clothes. And so my second article, which came out about 6 weeks afterwards, I actually revealed for the first time that elements of our special forces were in the crowd. Now, I didn't portray them as being, there for nefarious reasons or doing anything wrong. In fact, I even said it very well could be that they were there, to take care of business in case things did get out of hand.
But they weren't there in their capacity as private citizens and Trump voters.
That's correct. Now, there were we know that for a fact.
Of course.
There were enlisted people, retired military.
Ashley Babbitt was a former Air Force enlisted.
There were FBI agents there as private. There were ATF agents there, private capacity. There were Trump supporters from all of the bureaus and agencies and this, that, and the other thing within the federal government that were there in private capacities. And many of them were arrested and charged. Some of them did time in prison. And so in this particular situation, though, I learned through my own work and through my access to that community is that we had elements there of a very, very elite nature from our special operators. And I just published that they were there. Now, nobody believed me. Nobody wanted to believe me. I got highly criticized for that.
They've been ordered to be there.
Yes. Yes. And then exactly 1 year later, a writer for Newsweek, a gentleman by the name of William Arkin, on the first anniversary of January 6th, published an article. The headline was, "Secret Commandos with Shoot to Kill Orders at January 6th." That's the headline, the Newsweek story. It's still online. You can look it up. It took me over 2 years before Arkin would even respond to me because I wanted, I wanted to maybe pick his brain. He could pick mine. He could share with me what he knew, what I know, and he wouldn't talk to me. When he finally responded, he was very hostile toward me, very antagonistic. He says, "I feel like you've been trying to set me up." I'm not trying to set you up. I want a colleague to colleague share what we know about that very thing. And he actually, I have the screenshot from the DM communication with him where he denied that it ever even happened. Yeah, he goes, that was, it never happened. Well, you wrote about it. It's still online. If it never happened, how come it's not been retracted? Yeah, it just never happened.
He disavowed his own story.
That's correct.
Cost of living is already making it hard to live here, and it's not getting any better. Unfortunately, it's likely to get worse, and a lot of Americans fill the gap with credit cards, not just for fancy dinners, but to cover things like groceries and bills. That is a disaster. It's understandable, but don't go down that road because there is a tax, in effect, a survival tax of 20% interest or more. Why would you do that? Why would you hand money to the big banks when you could keep it for your family? Our friends at American Financing have a better way. If you're looking to buy your first home or refinance your current one, they're helping Americans achieve the dream of homeownership with monthly mortgage rates currently in the 5s. American Financing saves its customers an average of $800 per month. That's nearly 10 grand every year back to you. This isn't just a loan, it's a total financial reset. So debt is tough, but there's a smart way to do it and a reckless, self-destructive way to do it, credit cards. And so we recommend American Financing. They're salary-based, not commission-based, which means they actually work for you, not the banks. They're called America's Home for Home Loans for a reason. Call 800-685-5696, 800-685-5696, or visit americanfinancing.net/Tucker. Has the Pentagon ever admitted that this took place?
No, because the Pentagon won't even admit that this particular unit exists. Now, you've had a member of that unit sitting at your table here recently. They don't exist. That was one of the things that made this very difficult was, first of all, when you write a story, you have to call, and you know how it is. You have to call, get spokesperson on the record.
Yeah.
Disavowing or saying something or commenting about whatever, whether it's the FBI, CIA, DOD. Well, when you call the DOD and you ask them about this particular unit out of Fort Belvoir, just outside of D.C., we don't know what you're talking about. There's no such unit. Well, there is such a unit, and the special operators community is well aware of who they are. And they don't have a name, not a real name. They have a variety of names that they go by. They're typically universally referred to within their community as TFO, or Task Force Orange. There's been books written about them. They have variously been called the unit, the activity, and other things throughout the years. But they do exist.
What's their job? They operate domestically?
They have a couple of jobs. They are, they're not supposed to operate domestically, not at all, as none of the United States, armed forces are, except for National Guard. And so there's the signal intelligence group that's mostly, and they'll, believe me, they'll correct me when I get little minor details wrong. But the signal intelligence part of them, most of them are out of Fort Meade. And these are the guys, look, these are the most elite of the elite of the elite. Now, they don't look like Navy SEALs. They don't look like Delta Force guys. They're typically smaller. They use their brains. Their training is much more in the way of surviving through isolation. Mm-hmm. And they become deep inserts into jurisdictions around the world where we're not supposed to exist. We're not supposed to operate, that sort of thing. And they typically are on the front edge. They lead before Delta Force and SEALs are ever deployed. These guys, the unit, the activity, TFO, have been there already for a long time. And they have to survive that without contact. And they're all of them are polyglots. One of my closest friends and deepest sources within that community, he speaks 8 languages, 5 of them native, as he says. And they're all highly trained, all have specialization. They're all smart. IQ's off the chart. So they're not the
Right.
the meaty kind
Not
of
doing
guys.
1,000 push-ups, but they can't speak 8 languages.
It's not them.
Yeah.
But they run marathons, and everything about them is they're trained for endurance and isolation. Is their greatest
And
skills.
what was their job on January 6th?
Don't know. Still haven't found that out.
But you found out early that there were current members, on-duty members of the U.S. military in the crowd,
Yes.
dressed in civilian clothes. What's the CIA's connection to the events of that day?
I believe that, well, look, you go back to the 51 intel
Yes.
leaders who signed the
Retired
letter,
intel officers who
Correct.
denied that Hunter Biden's laptop was Hunter Biden's.
et cetera, et cetera. Yes. This is all part of that same operation downstream from Mark Milley.
Yep.
Trump's, chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yep.
I believe that certain very high-ranking elements in the Capitol Police were obviously in on this. We know that now from our video. We've discovered this from the video review, Tucker. I don't have to pull this out of my ass. It's in the videos. And we've released a lot of it, and a lot more of it is coming. But we know that the Capitol Police were ground soldiers that day. Not all of them. The frontline officers, they were doing their job.
Yep.
In fact, I one of my very first stories, and I got this from my own camera, was that the Capitol Police were, I called them sacrificial lambs that day, or pawns. I use the word pawn, sacrificial pawns. And the reason why I said that is when I was on the front line with my camera and had my camera in these young officers' faces that had just been called to the front line of this battle that was just breaking out on the lower West Terrace there at the Capitol. They had fear in their eyes, and they had no protection. They had no body armor. They had no goggles. They had no face, gas masks. They had no helmets. That's another story right there. Their helmets had been collected 2 weeks before. Were taken up. They were ordered to turn their helmets in.
Yes.
That's a whole other story that we've done work on. That's why I said we could do a 20-part series on this. This is so complex. But my thought about these young frontline Capitol Police officers, real quick. You can be a Capitol Police officer for 30 years, and I'm not being critical. I know they're accused of being, glorified mall cops, that sort of thing, tour guides. But you can go 30 years at the Capitol Police and basically never do anything other than, yes, ma'am, the restroom's this way.
Yes.
Unlike Metropolitan Police Department, who...
The city of Washington.
Right.
DC police.
That police force knocks heads every day.
For sure.
They have to deal with most of the riots. And so I saw these young kids being called to the front line facing actual real violence, because there was real violence that day. And my next thought was what they're seeing coming at them over my shoulder. And for instance, the Capitol Police Lieutenant, Tarek Johnson, who you interviewed.
Yes.
He called his wife and said, "Tell the kids I love them. I'm not coming home today. This is, we're dying here today." And that's what they thought, because all of a sudden there's this handful of just a few dozen people violently attacking the front line of officers, but they see tens of thousands of people over my shoulder coming at them, not knowing what their intentions were. They were scared. They were scared to death.
Yeah.
And some of them overreacted. So I have a lot of sympathy for these frontline officers, because they were not, they didn't get briefings that morning.
Right.
They were undermanned, understaffed on purpose. January 6th, every 4 years, is supposed to be an all boots on the ground day for the Capitol Police. They're supposed to work double shifts, as a matter of fact. That's policy. That's department policy for First Amendment protest days. The Capitol Police themselves had issued and signed off on 6 permits for protest on the property that day, and they did not inform their officers that they had issued permits that day.
Jeez. How many federal agents in plain clothes were in the crowd that day? Do we know?
Unknown. You have to separate that. You know, we heard the reports a few months ago about the 247 that
Yes.
Patel, this is one of the actual truths that Kash Patel has told about that day, is that there were 240-something FBI agents that were called in for crowd control. But Tucker, they didn't arrive till after 4 o'clock. Those orders were issued late. These were not the undercovers. These were not the ones that's reported were doing nefarious activities. These were people with no crowd control training whatsoever. The FBI is not trained for that. A special agent in the FBI is not trained for crowd control.
Yeah, they're not bouncers.
And they showed up with their FBI jackets on, their FBI ball caps, their vests. Some of them had put on their ballistic vests, that kind of thing. But it all was emblazoned with FBI. These were not the plain. Okay, all FBI are plain clothes, except for the SWAT teams, all of them. And so when you say that they were plain clothes, that doesn't mean undercover, but they showed up with their FBI, big yellow letters all over their gear. And I was there. I videoed them as they arrived, but I also videoed the SWAT team that was already there early on. It was FBI SWAT team that were trying to save Ashley Babbitt's life down in the lower level of the Capitol.
Yep.
I walked right past her body.
You did?
Yes.
Mm.
I'm the one that published the video of her being extracted out the south door. That's my video.
Christians ought to be safe in the Holy Land of all places, but they are not. Keep in mind, these are the descendants of the first converts, the first people who followed Jesus, people whose families have worshiped in the land Jesus walked for centuries, for thousands of years. And these same people are now facing enormous pressure to leave, fleeing their homes amid war and anti-Christian terrorism. Untold numbers of innocents are lost and without hope, fellow Christians. But how do you support them? There are groups out there who claim to support them whose real agenda is to move them out of their actual homeland. We think that's wrong. We think that's evil, in fact. And so we've looked far and wide to find a group that is actually supporting Christians in the Middle East. And we found one. It's called the Vulnerable People Project, VPP. It's one of the very few groups consistently helping vulnerable Christians throughout the Holy Land. They deliver food and water to Christian communities trapped in Gaza, for example. They help rescue civilians. They provide emergency aid to families who have nowhere else to turn. Today, they are helping Christian churches and families safely remain in the communities where their ancestors worshiped Jesus. There should be a lot of groups doing this, and trust us, we have looked for over a year now, and there aren't. But the Vulnerable People Project is doing exactly that, and their work makes an amazing difference in people's lives. A gift of just $33 helps provide a day of protection and support for the vulnerable Christians in the West Bank. Who's looking out for them? Nobody. Well, they are. A monthly gift of $83 helps sustain that protection throughout the month. So visit SaveWestBankChristians.com and stand with Christians in the land where Christianity began. That's SaveWestBankChristians.com. We are proud to partner with them. Thank you.
So we don't know. So the 240 FBI agents number is not relevant to the question of to what extent was this a setup?
That 247 are absolutely irrelevant.
Right.
And that's another thing that the right gets wrong. If I have to characterize the two narratives about January 6th, that's one that they get wrong.
But the relevant question is how many people in the crowd pretending to be protesters were actually working for the federal government.
Correct.
And we don't have that answer.
We don't have that number. The FBI could tell us that number. They know that number. First of all, we know that there was 20-something CHSs that they've told us about, confidential human sources, actively working with FBI handlers as they were embedded in the various organizations, whether the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or 3%ers or whatever. We know that. I believe there was a much higher number than that they've not revealed. And then, of course, there were the operatives. The other thing, and I'm not trying to give FBI any grace in this, but the truth of the matter is if you've got a crowd size of, my estimate was that the total crowd size was between 400,000, 600,000 people at the Capitol that day.
Damn.
Actual Capitol police officers who testified in the crowd said that as they looked out over the sea of people, it was, this is a quote from the trials, it was a crowd as large as any inaugural event I have ever attended. That means it's big, really big. And so Now, the press still says that there were only 30,000 people in D.C. that day. They've held to that number. And that's incorrect. And then you've got people that exaggerate and say there were 2 million people, but there weren't. So you have this situation where in a crowd of that size, anytime, you're going to have elements of all of the federal law enforcement agencies and departments and bureaus are going to be there. They're going to have counter surveillance teams in the crowd, and we want them there. They're sniffing for bombs. They're looking for ne'er-do-wells. They know the signs. They're trained for that very thing, and we want them there, just as we want them in Times Square, on New Year's Eve, just as we want them in any large event.
Sure, because they're there to protect the public. What you don't want is plainclothes federal agents or confidential human sources stirring up mayhem, provoking violence.
Or actual trained provocateurs in the crowd.
Were there?
Absolutely.
Was Ray Epps one of them?
I believe he was. I mean, look, the circumstantial evidence is there. Look, you know the story intimately about Ray Epps.
Yeah, he kept threatening to sue me, but never did.
Yeah, well, he probably doesn't want to go through discovery.
I suspect that's true.
Absolutely. But, I mean, look, we don't need to relive his case, but the obvious is the obvious. He was number 16 on the FBI's January 6th most wanted list, and then suddenly he wasn't. And suddenly disappeared. And suddenly the New York Times comes out, Alan Foyer, and does a puff piece article on him. And gosh, when did that come out? Summer of 22. And they made him the sympathetic character.
I'll never forget it. Yeah.
It's incredible. How does the guy that is the most open, most broadcast person calling people to go into the Capitol, how does he become the sympathetic character of the left?
And never get charged,
Eventually.
Eventually, right, but with minor charges.
He never even had to come into
Nick
D.C.
Fuentes never got charged with anything,
no.
Which is kind of crazy since Nick Fuentes was calling people to rush the Capitol. What is that?
A lot of people. There are there's characters that are on video, and there's a tremendous amount of video beyond the Capitol Police CCTV. Which, by the way, that video has no, the CCTV, as you know, has no audio, but the body cam footage, the news camera footages, the insane amount of iPhone footage that have been collected for discovery in all these trials. So we hear tons and tons of characters that are calling for violence, calling for people to attack law enforcement, to storm the Capitol, this, that, and the other thing. And so many of those have never been arrested.
Is that true?
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, you were.
And I was. Correct.
And what were you charged with?
So when the FBI first interviewed me in October of 21, a month later, the U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney who had my case, notified my attorney in Raleigh that his client was going to be charged within the week. This was the week before Thanksgiving of 21. And they listed the charges. They were going to charge me with, I kid you not, interstate racketeering. To my knowledge, I was the only one of everybody in the whole January 6th dragnet prosecutions, weaponization of our government against all of us, that was going to be charged with racketeering. And basically the case that they were going to make is that because I, as an independent journalist, blogger, had made money from the licensing of my videos, HBO licensed my videos, New York Times licensed my videos for their documentary, others all over the world licensed some of my videos. And, you don't give her much money for, it's like the standard rate is $1,000 per minute. Well, so when they use 6 seconds of your video, you're not getting a lot of money.
No.
So that was the only thing that we could conclude. And then, so what we did is we did a major press offensive. So this was the week before Thanksgiving. On Monday of Thanksgiving week, we sent out about 200 press releases to all manner of media and saying that journalist is being prosecuted for his journalism on January 6th, being me. And the DOJ backed off. And we didn't hear from them again even though they said I was going to be arrested Thanksgiving week. We have this in writing, by the way. Still do. They said I was going to be arrested the week of Thanksgiving of 21. We didn't hear from them again until 20 months later when I got a grand jury subpoena.
20 months?
20 months. They went dead silent. Would not even respond to my attorneys.
That's so wrong. That is not a free country when they act like that.
Left me in the lurch like that for that long. And then it wasn't until after the grand jury subpoena, it was another 8 months before they did actually arrest me. And
Where did they arrest you?
I was working for the Blaze at the time, and I was in Dallas, where the Blaze headquarters was. It was kind of pre-planned when they told us what the date of my voluntary submission to the FBI. We chose to do that in Dallas so that we could get it all on camera. And I submitted myself to the FBI field office in Dallas, and then they processed me there, handcuffed me. That's where they captured my perp walk on camera, and then they took me down to the federal courthouse in Dallas.
You charged with felony?
Nope, I wasn't. I was charged with 4 misdemeanors. Ultimately, they charged me with the basic 4, parading, what I call glorified trespassing.
Disorderly conduct?
Nope. Well, they do that, but there wasn't any. In fact, that was the other advantage that we had. Even before my arrest through the Blaze, we released all 37 minutes of me in the Capitol behaving like a journalist, stopping, taking notes, camera, this, that. I mean, my entire 37 minutes are on YouTube. You can go watch it right now.
And so what happened?
Ultimately, I had a trial date set that was exactly 1 week after the 2024 election. I had...
Are you serious?
Yeah. So I have... my pretrial hearing was the day after the election. And Judge Christopher Cooper, which, by the way, the same judge who just made them take Trump's name off of the Kennedy Center, same judge, he hated me. He really wanted to put me in jail.
For what?
My journalism.
Walking in a building you own to commit journalism?
Wait till you hear what he said in my hearing. So the day after the election, he was obviously in a bad mood because Trump won. And he shot down every one of our motions. I mean, it would not allow me to present a selective prosecution defense. And that was going to be our primary defense, is because we were going to force the government to explain why the other 80-something journalists that came in from the outside into the inside of the Capitol that day and followed the story where the story went, why weren't they prosecuted? All the people that work for the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, et cetera, et cetera.
They were not arrested.
Correct. Not arrested, not charged with anything. Why were they not? And yet I was. So that was going to be our argument. And the judge totally said, you're not going to do a selective prosecution, and you cannot present a First Amendment case in this courtroom.
You can't appeal to the Constitution of your own country.
That's correct. So as soon as we got off of the pretrial hearing, it was a Zoom call. I got on another Zoom call with my attorneys, 4 of them, and immediately 2 of my attorneys, who are former federal prosecutors themselves, said, look, you understand that this trial is going to be nothing but a shaming exercise against you. And I said, yeah, I've been covering the trials. I know exactly what they're going to do. I'm not doing it. Inform the court, inform the DOJ that I'm pleading guilty to all 4 misdemeanor charges.
And what was the penalty?
Well, so this was now my pretrial hearing was the day after the election. My beginning of my court date was supposed to be the very next week, exactly 1 week after the election. The next day, we got a message from Charlie Kirk because he was on the transition team. And he said directly to me, your pardon is a done deal. Don't worry about it. It's all taken care of. So I had that knowledge and that information going into my trial date, and I rolled the dice. That's why I pled guilty to all 4, rather than going through the humiliation exercise. And so we were in the hearing, and at the end of that pleading guilty to all 4, the judge asked the clerk, when is Mr. Baker's sentencing hearing? And she typed in, she goes, Mr. Baker's sentencing hearing will be March 6th. He goes, okay. He said, Mr. Baker, your sentencing hearing is going to be on March 6th of next year. He said, But since I probably will not see you in March, he knew the pardons were coming as well. All of those judges did. They all knew it, that the pardons were coming. He said, since I won't see you in March, he said, and I quote, I'm going to hazard to deliver to you the remarks that I would normally give at your sentencing hearing. And then he dressed me down for the next 7 or 8 minutes. I have the transcript for my journal. He never mentioned one thing I was charged with, never mentioned anything that I did or said at the Capitol. The only thing he did was my post-January 6th, or talked about was my post-January 6th journalism, in which I had referred to the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the bias of this court. And he spent 7 or 8 minutes defending the court against my journalism. Not one word about my
This is nuts.
charges.
Nuts.
I have it all. So I have the transcripts.
Wow. So you never went to jail?
No, I did not get a pardon. I got a case dismissal with prejudice because in the federal system, until you are sentenced,
Right.
you're not convicted.
Right.
Because that's when the paperwork basically is filed. And so I was, for me, it's like it never happened. I mean, it did. I went through 3 years of hell with that, but
Yeah. And the cost, I can't even imagine. Wow. I don't think that got enough attention at the time.
I was one of the high profile cases. I actually had a bevy of mainstream media journalists from the Washington Post, AP, and WUSA 9 and everything were there in my hearing. They were there. And in fact, in the press conference afterwards outside the courthouse, I actually looked at the guy from the Washington Post, Spencer Hugh, and I said, you were in there. You heard what the judge said. He criticized me for my journalism, not for what I did on January 6th.
What did Spencer Hugh of the Washington Post say?
He went, yeah, you're right. And then his article that came out later that day was incredibly fair.
Good.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, but it was months, many months after January 6th that I first became aware of the mystery of the 2 pipe bombs left on Capitol Hill that morning. It was a piece, I think, by Darren Beatty and Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was at least 4 years ago. And I don't think we're any closer to, or I'm not any closer to understanding what that was. Can you describe the story, like what was publicly conveyed about those pipe bombs, and then tell the story about what you think actually happened?
Yeah, what the public believes happened was that a nefarious individual planted these devices, these weapons of mass destruction at both the Republican National Committee headquarters and the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And that a lot of people believe that those were to be used in case we couldn't stop the people who stormed the Capitol that day.
The insurrectionists.
Right, the insurrectionists, which I was accused of being, couldn't stop the vote that day, or the confirmation of the Electoral College vote, that they were going to blow the bombs. That was the initial thought, and that was, of course, the way the press breathlessly presented this.
Right.
That's not at all what happened. Let's just start with the very beginning.
So but here's what we know, where we read that day or the next day. 2 bombs, 2 explosive devices were found outside in front of the RNC and the DNC on Capitol Hill on January 6th, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Now, everything starts breaking down from there. First of all, we now know in hindsight from actual FBI agents who were tasked to that investigation that they were told by leadership that the devices were inert. Individuals that are familiar with bomb making and bomb training from all of the federal agencies have said, looking at the photographs and looking at the FBI's forensic report, which came out a week later, I have the entire report, said that these were typical training devices.
They were not bombs.
They were not bombs. One of the FBI whistleblowers famously said they would have been bombs if they had been bombs. And so We now know that, despite what the FBI continues to say about the devices being dangerous, having the potential to do great harm and bodily. In fact, they've charged the guy that they've arrested with weapons of mass destruction and terrorism.
But I mean, when it was first reported, it was reported as an act of terrorism.
Yes.
But you're saying the FBI knew right away, or
Absolutely. They knew
they were not bombs.
Yeah, they knew on the day of that they were not bombs.
Why would they lie about that?
I don't think that the FBI was brought into the lie until the investigation began. And then that's when the blob informs the blob that we must protect the blob.
Yes.
And that's where we are today.
Well, that's how things actually work.
That's how it's
It's
exactly
not, it's
how it
not
works.
partisan.
No.
It's not one agency. It's not a rogue agency or a rogue politician. It is the system protecting itself.
And by the way, I stole the blob analogy from Mike Benz, who actually did the work for Darren Beatty back on the pipe
He did,
bomb
and I
back
should
then.
have said that. I
Right,
should have
right.
said that.
And so that was the first breakdown. The second breakdown is then in the timing. So the discovery of the devices. The first one was discovered 25 minutes before the bicameral meeting of Congress and the gavel dropped by Vice President Pence at 1 o'clock. So the first bomb was discovered 25 minutes before that. All right. Then the second device was discovered 5 minutes after 1 o'clock. Well, Chief of Police, Capitol Police,
Steve
Stephen Son, who you've interviewed a couple of times, he absolutely says that those were diversionary devices. Those were meant to divert resources from the Capitol, already, as I mentioned earlier, extremely depleted. There's on January 6th, there were 2,000 uniformed officers with the Capitol Police. Less than 250 were on duty that day.
Despite the fact there were all these 6 or something registered protests?
Despite the fact that the Assistant Chief of Police, Yogananda Pittman, had signed off on 6 legally permitted protest events on the Capitol grounds.
Yogananda Pittman, who went on to get rewarded by Nancy Pelosi with a job at the
Berkeley
University of California at Berkeley. Yeah. Tells you so much. Okay, so, but these bombs or these devices were found right around the time of the vote.
Correct.
And the rest of us thought that it was almost like the anthrax attacks before 9/11. Like we knew,
right,
or after 9/11, we knew something terrible was going on, but there were never any details.
Yeah. Well, here's another interesting aspect of the timing. So not only did the gavel drop at 1 o'clock, those 6 permits all began at 1 o'clock. Now, Trump had messed up the schedule because he arrived at the stage at the Ellipse an hour late. So he was supposed to take the stage and begin his speech, his hour-long speech at 11 a.m. He did not take the stage until 11:57. All right. Then he went over his time. He did not leave the stage till 1:16 p.m. By then, the first breaches had already happened. The first battle lines had already been established, and the first launching of less than lethals into the crowd were already taking place before the president ever left the stage. All those early people, including Ray Epps, including about 50 former Marines that were on that front line, had already breached the barricades, had already started taunting and attacking police. And now you have 2 calls over the police radio, which we have. We have the entire all day of the police radio. And the calls go out. They need reinforcements at the RNC and the DNC because that's within both of those buildings or within the Capitol Police jurisdiction. So they had to divert this already depleted force. And that's why we know that they were diversionary devices. And that was the point, was to pull law enforcement away. So at the same time that Capitol Police are going to the other locations, now you have the arrival of Metropolitan Police are now showing up at the Capitol. They're streaming in. They're coming in to kick butt. The fighting gets worse and worse and worse. And as I said, good people on both sides of the line, bad people on both sides of the line. And the next thing that we know, and this is what's really important, is in the aftermath of the devices, is what we learned from video. And this is the single most important thing that we learned from video, first of all, is we saw the reaction to the discovery of the device at the DNC. Now, we did not see the reaction because the Capitol Police has never showed us, or the FBI has never showed us any video in the alleyway behind the RNC. No, the device was actually behind the Capitol Hill Club, Republican hangout, kind of next door and attached to the RNC. There's allegedly no camera there, but there is. I'll get to that here in a minute. But at the DNC, we see a Thomas Massey likes to call him the two counter surveillance officers that work for the Capitol Police, undercover, plain clothes, counter surveillance officers, Capitol Police, and they work for the Intel Department of the Capitol Police. One of them, Massey calls man bun guy because he was wearing a man bun, and the other one he calls backpack guy. Well, backpack guy went to the two SUVs that were guarding the parking deck entrance of the DNC. Why were they there? Because then Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was inside the DNC, not where she was supposed to be, by the way. She's supposed to be over at the Capitol, which is another very, very strange aspect to this entire story. Is she's being coronated over at the Capitol, and she's a voting senator, and she's not there. At 1 o'clock, she's inside the DNC. So the Secret Service have swept that building already. Human assets, dogs, they've swept that entire side. We found on video at 8:30 in the morning, 8, 9, 10 Secret Service walking right past where the bomb allegedly was found. That bomb was in the wide open. It could not have not been seen. It could not have not been found by bomb dogs. It could not have not been found by, not to mention the pedestrians that were walking by it all day long. It's wide open. It's right there. It wasn't hidden behind a bush. At 1:05, backpack guy, counter surveillance officer with the Capitol Police, goes over to the SUVs. He informs the Secret Service agents sitting inside the two SUVs, we just found a, bomb, suspicious device. The reaction of the Secret Service agents is the most suspicious thing that made all of our mind, Darren Beatty, Mike Benz, anybody else who's done any work on the pipe bomb knows that when you're informed that there's a bomb sitting 10 feet from you, you don't sit in the SUV and finish your sandwich for 2.5 minutes.
No.
And then when they get out, they casually walk around. They don't stop traffic. Now, there's protocol. Okay, these guys are trained. Every one of these agencies, bureaus are all trained on what to do when suspicious devices are found. They have to set up perimeters, cordon off a certain amount, depending upon the type of device they think it is.
Yeah.
It could be 700 feet. It could be 2,000 feet.
Yeah, it's a bomb.
It's a bomb. So within a matter of feet, they don't have any concern for their own safety whatsoever. They're allowing families to continue walking 10 feet past the bomb down the sidewalk.
May I interrupt? And we know for a fact that they were told it was a bomb.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, then
I don't believe that they were told that, though. This is what we've been told. I believed, and I've said this from the very beginning, the only thing that explains their reaction, or lack of reaction thereof, was the fact that they were told by the Capitol Police guys, hey, look, we're in the middle of a training exercise. So we've got these, devices over here. We're going to have to start the dog and pony show here a little bit. The bomb squad's going to come out. We're going to have the robot and all that. Oh, no, go ahead and finish your lunch. That's the only thing that explains the reaction.
And it's why that Kamala Harris, despite being there at the time and talking about January 6th constantly like it was Pearl Harbor plus 9/11, never publicly said a word about the fact she was there. Now, you would think Kamala Harris would be bragging, I survived January 6th. I survived a bombing attempt from the radical right-wing supremacists or whatever.
Instead, it took a year before Newsweek, not Newsweek, Politico revealed that she was even in the building.
Right. That's
It was
right.
an entire year.
So I think we can say, based on everything that you said, pretty confidently, these were not bombs.
These were not bombs.
Right. How'd they get there?
This is where we have a real struggle, because we have the videos of this dark figure, this gray, hoodied figure walking through that area around the RNC and DNC on the night of the 5th.
Both.
What's that?
Both on both sides.
On
RNC
both sides.
and DNC.
Same individual, caught on camera, multiple cameras, all, they're caught on ring cams, caught on the DNC cameras, caught on Capitol CCTV cameras. This figure comes out of nowhere at 7:34 p.m., plants both devices, and then disappears through a secret gate, by the way, at 8:18 p.m.
Through a secret gate.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
In the alleyway behind the RNC, and there's residences in that alleyway.
Yeah.
And businesses. And the actual alley is called Rumsey Court. And at the opposite end of the long alleyway from where the RNC and the Capitol Hill Club are is a Catholic church. And there's a garden on the other side of a fence. Well, if you don't know where the gate is, because it's a hidden latch, and the gate, it completely and perfectly blends in with the fence. So if you're not a resident, you don't know that gate exists. And there's no path, there's no footprints or whatever. The first time I went through it, there was snow on the ground that I went out and checked it out myself. So only reason I found it is because I could see the snow prints where the local residents use that as a shortcut. The second time I went out there and videoed, there's no evidence whatsoever. And I had my camera, and you can't see a latch, you can't see a gate of any kind. I happen to know where it was because I'd been through it before. And so this young bomber, which we'll get into, I'm sure, here in a moment, this young black autistic individual who allegedly confessed to the crime, told FBI that he mapped out his route for planting the devices by using Google Maps. There's two things that aren't on Google Maps, though. That secret gate, nor are the blind spots in Capitol Police CCTV cameras.
And the person who left these devices was clearly aware of where the blind spots were.
And now we know more by video. Now, the FBI has only ever released about 30 seconds of video of the bomber and put out a $500,000 reward asking for tips from the public. If you recognize the way this person walks or the way you recognize anything about it, call this 1-800 number. And the interesting thing is that the FBI themselves told the Congressional Committee, this was Loudermilk and Massey's report, that they had 30,000 video files of the bomber. That's their number, not mine. 30,000 video files. They have only released about 30 seconds of video. Because of our access to Capitol CCTV, we have about 21 minutes of the hooded bomber walking around. It's never been shown to the public.
Where'd you get that?
Of Capitol CCTV.
How do you get access to Capitol CCTV?
Well, if you remember, you guys were first granted access by McCarthy.
Mm-hmm.
And then they used a small handful of us as guinea pigs to eventually give universal access.
So House investigators had it.
House investigators have it. They have the hard drives. Right?
Yep.
And then they gave us access. Myself, Julie Kelly, John Solomon, Joe Hanneman, who was with Epic Times at the time, now my partner in this project. They and myself. And so with this access that we got, we literally harvested this amount of footage of the bomber walking around. And this is where it really comes home to the Capitol Police, is on the evening that the gray hooded figure was planting the devices, this individual only sat down in two places. during the stroll, during that 7:34 to 8:18 period. The first place that the hooded bomber sat down at was the DNC bench. Then, but did not place the bomb the first time that this individual sat down. Got up, left, went around the block, and went to the Congressional Black Caucus Institute and sat down at a bush outside the Congressional Black Caucus. Reached into the backpack, pulled out a device, and slid it under the bush. Then changed their mind, reached, grabbed it back, and put it back into the pouch or the backpack. Stood up, went down a back alleyway, back to the DNC, and then planted the bomb at the DNC. You can see the hooded figure on camera reach in, pull the device out of the bag, and then lay it over behind the bench and the mulch there. One problem with that scene right there is the FBI says that Brian Cole Jr., who they arrested for being the bomber, said that that was when he set the timer on, the egg timer, kitchen timer. Except on video, he doesn't set the timer. One hand in, one hand out, never stops to set the timer and sets it down. FBI is clearly wrong. And if the kid really gave that in his confession, he was clearly lying in his confession. Or delusional. Or the fact that autistic individuals give the highest percentage of false confessions to law enforcement of any other demographic.
So he wasn't charged, however, when you first started looking into the story, Brian Cole Jr.
No, and this is where the problem comes in. Let me go back to the sitting down at the two locations. So the next day, on the 6th, the first device is found at the RNC, alerted by a lady by the name of Carlin Younger. And the first device is found at 25 minutes before 1 o'clock. And then the Capitol Police send out over their radio, they deploy their own counter and surveillance teams, 3 of them, 2 men each, to go out and look for other devices. This one counter surveillance team, where Man Bun Guy and Backpack Guy, we find their car. My team, my guys on my investigative team, find their car. We follow their car through the city, and it arrives at the Metro South parking lot right across the street from the RNC. They get out of their car, put their backpacks and their jackets on. They walk and they beat. Now, they're deployed to look for devices, right? This is their job. Our job is to look for devices. They spend their entire stroll from Metro South over to not the DNC. They go to Congressional Black Caucus Institute and walk right up to the bush. Do this. Look under the bush. 2 minutes later, they then find the bomb at the DNC. The only 2 places that the hooded individuals sat down the night before is the only 2 places they actually looked in their stroll while they were looking for devices. They didn't look under the garbage cans, under cars. They didn't look under other bushes. They looked nowhere else. Tucker, this was a Capitol Police operation.
Do we know the identities of Man Bun and Backpack?
Yes. They have been interviewed by the committee. In fact, Representative Massey actually interviewed Man Bun Guy himself. They have been interviewed, and the congressional investigators say that it's the most pre-planned and rehearsed interview they've ever witnessed in their life. And by the way, they could only get permission to interview them if they were not under oath, and they had to be interviewed together, which you never do in an investigation.
They were not under oath?
Nope. They were not under oath, and it was not a
Why would a
transcribed
law
interview.
enforcement officer refuse to testify under oath?
Because this was Capitol Police. Capitol Police is different.
Why would House investigators settle for that? How about no?
Because Johnson and Jordan restricted the committee from investigating the Capitol Police.
Now, why would they do that?
The Praetorian Guard?
Yeah. So if you're the just to be clear, I mean, and if you doubt this, you can go back into the clips and look at every sex scandal or DUI scandal on Capitol Hill. It's always the Capitol Police who are involved in it. And tons of people on the Hill have drinking or drug problems. There's a lot of crazy sex-related behavior and other things, and the Capitol Police know all that.
Yes. They know,
Am I being a conspiracy nut here? Or is it?
no. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever met Tarek Johnson, it's one of the reasons why I gave your team his story.
Yep.
Was he looked at me the very first time I met with him, was in 22 sometime. And he said, Steve, you have no idea how powerful the Capitol Police are.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm thinking Keystone Cops, glorified mall cops.
Of course.
No way. No. Dignitary Protection Detail and the Intel Department are not the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
This is the CIA. And as a result of that cooperation with the agency, they know where all the bodies are buried. They know where the skeletons in the closets are. Everything that you just talked about a moment ago. This is what they have privileged knowledge to, and this is how they affect legislation on Capitol Hill. This is how they affect who the leadership is going to be. That's how the leadership disappoints us so gravely every time we get our guy in, and he suddenly is no longer our guy.
So you think that the Capitol Police are like a vector of control?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would not be surprised by that.
100%.
At all. At all. And of course, they're controlled by the Speaker of the House.
Yes.
So it's an inherently political operation.
So Loudermilk, Congressman Loudermilk, who's chairman of the last two January 6th investigative committees. The first one, his subcommittee was under House Administration. The new one is a subcommittee under Judiciary Committee, chaired by Jordan. Loudermilk is the chairman of the subcommittee. In order for him to even get this committee, and how do I know this? Is because he told me himself to my face. The only way he was able to continue his investigation into matters related to January 6th is he had to agree not to investigate the Capitol Police. To which my response was, you can't investigate January 6th without investigating the Capitol Police.
Why would you ever allow? I mean, any investigation that begins with parameters like that, it's like Jeffrey Epstein's search warrants. It's like designed to obscure rather than illuminate the truth.
Right. They thought that they would eventually have the ability to circumvent some of that. And they did get the interview with the two counter surveillance. I know their names. I've never released their names publicly, but I know
Are they
who
still
both
there,
of them
do you think?
are. Yes. In fact, Backpack Guy is now you're not going to believe this, he's now the Capitol Police liaison to the FBI.
Well, that doesn't surprise me at all.
I kid you not.
Doesn't surprise me at all. If you look into the work histories of people with big jobs in D.C., it's very, very common to come across something like that. You know, I mean, he'll probably be the director of the FBI someday.
Right. So there's two things that we know. We know that the bomber had intimate knowledge that only Capitol Police could know. The hidden gate, the under several reasons why the knowledge of where the blind spots were in the cameras is very important to this story. Not the least of which is that the bomber only carried one bomb at a time and reloaded the backpack in a blind spot over at Folger Park, knowing that there was no, and that's where the bomber either parked their car or their accomplice was waiting for them there.
Who would have access to the blind spots? Only someone.
Only the Capitol Police.
Right.
Only. We know that there was, when the bomber entered the there's a famous video of the bomber apparently waving at a cop car right in front of the Capitol Hill Club as a marked Capitol Police car comes by. The bomber apparently waves at the car, then walks around the corner. Two Capitol Police cars pull up with their headlights on and create a blind. They blitz out the cameras that are faced down the street. It completely obscures